Welcome back to Nikki Woo Cozy Stories. I'm your host, Nikki. Tonight, we continue our cozy retelling of Anne of Green Gables. Episode 2, Marilla is Surprised. The road is still stretching gently ahead. The morning light, soft across the fields. And Anne's story is only just beginning to unfold. So settle in and let the story continue. Evening had settled over Green Gables. The last light of day lingered along the fields, soft and golden, fading slowly into a quiet blue. The air was still. The trees stood calm, as though listening. Inside the house, everything was in its place, orderly, neat, and waiting. The door opened. Marilla came briskly forward, her step quick, her mind already set on the boy she expected to see. But when her eyes fell on the small figure standing there, the thin little girl in a stiff, plain dress, with long braids of red hair and bright, expectant eyes, she stopped. For a moment, she simply looked. "Matthew Cuthbert, who is that?" she asked. "Where's the boy?" "There wasn't any boy," Matthew said, a little uneasily. "There was only her." He nodded toward the child, suddenly aware that he had never even asked her name. "No boy," Marilla said sharply. "But there must have been a boy. We sent word for a boy." "Well, there wasn't," said Matthew. "She brought her, and I had to bring her home. She couldn't be left there." "Well, this is a pretty piece of business," said Marilla. Until then, the child had been very still. But now, the meaning of it reached her. She dropped her carpetbag. "You don't want me," she cried. "You don't want me because I'm not a boy. I might have expected it. Nobody ever did want me. I might have known it was all too beautiful to last." Her voice trembled, then broke. "Oh, what shall I do? I'm going to burst into tears." And burst into tears she did. She flung herself down on a chair by the table, burying her face into her arms, and sobbed as though her heart would break. Marilla and Matthew looked at each other across the stove. Neither of them spoke. There are moments that arrive so suddenly that even the most practical minds are left without a plan, and this was one of them. At last, Marilla stepped forward. Well, there's no need to cry so about it." "Yes, there is need," the child cried, lifting her face, tear-stained, trembling earnest. "You would cry too, if you were an orphan and had come to a place that you thought was going to be your home and found that they didn't want you because you weren't a boy. Oh, this is the most tragical thing that has ever happened to me." Something in her intensity, so real, so unguarded, softened the edge of Marilla's expression, if only a little. "Well, don't cry anymore," she said. "We're not going to turn you out tonight. You have to stay here until we find out what has happened. What's your name?" The child hesitated. "Will you please just call me Cordelia?" she asked eagerly. "Call you Cordelia? Is that your name?" "No, not exactly," she admitted. "But I would love to be called Cordelia. It's such a perfectly elegant name." "I don't know what on earth you mean," said Marilla. "If Cordelia isn't your name, what is?" "Anne Shirley," the child said, a little reluctantly. "But oh, please do call me Cordelia. It can't matter very much what you call me if I'm only going to be here a little while, can it? And Anne is such an unromantic name." "Unromantic fiddlesticks," said Marilla. "Anne is a perfectly good, sensible name. You've no need to be ashamed of it." "Oh, I'm not ashamed of it," Anne said quickly. "I only like Cordelia better. I've always imagined that my name was Cordelia. At least, I have for a long time now. But if you must call me Anne, please call me Anne spelled with an E." "What difference does it make how it's spelled?" asked Marilla. "Oh, it makes such a difference," Anne said softly. "It looks so much nicer. And when you hear a name, don't you just always see it in your mind? Anne spelled with an E just seems more complete." Marilla gave a small, practical sigh. "Well, very well then, Anne spelled with an E. Now you can tell us how this mistake came to be made. We sent word with Mrs. Spencer to bring us a boy." "Oh, yes, there were plenty of boys," Anne said. "But Mrs. Spencer said distinctly that she wanted a girl about 11 years old, and the matron said she thought I would do." Her face brightened for a moment. "You don't know how delighted I was. I couldn't sleep at all last night for joy." Then she turned toward Matthew, her voice softening. "Oh, why didn't you tell me at the station that you didn't want me and leave me there? If I hadn't seen the white way of delight in the lake of shining waters, it wouldn't be so hard." "What on earth does she mean?" Marilla asked. "She's just referring to the things we saw on the road," said Matthew quickly. "I'll go and put the horse away, Marilla. Have tea ready when I come back." He slipped out, leaving the kitchen quieter than before. Marilla turned back to Anne. "Did Mrs. Spencer bring anybody over besides you?" "She brought a little girl for herself," Anne said. "Lily Jones. She's only 5 and very pretty. If I was very beautiful with nut brown hair, would you keep me?" "No," said Marilla plainly. "We want a boy to help Matthew on the farm. A girl would be of no use to us." The words fell simply, but they settled heavily in the room. Anne didn't answer. She stood very still, her small hands clasped together, as though holding something inside them that she did not quite know how to let go. The light in the kitchen had grown softer. Outside, the last of the evening lingered quietly over the fields, and the stillness of the house seemed to settle more deeply, now that the first surprise had passed. Marilla moved about with her usual efficiency, though there was a certain stiffness in it, as if her thoughts had not yet found their proper order. "Take off your hat," she said. "I'll lay it on your bag on the hall in the table." Anne obeyed at once, though more gently now, as if the earlier burst of feeling had left her a little fragile. Matthew returned a few moments later and sat down to supper. The table was neat and plain, set simple with dishes that spoke of long habit and careful living. But Anne couldn't eat. She tried. She broke off a small piece of bread, tasted it, then set it down. She looked at the crab apple preserve with a kind of distant politeness, as though it belonged to someone else's world. "You're not eating anything," said Marilla, watching her with quiet disapproval. Anne gave a soft sigh. "I can't. I'm in the depths of despair. Can you eat when you're in the depths of despair?" "I've never been in the depths of despair," said Marilla, "so I can't say." "Weren't you?" Anne asked earnestly. "Well, did you ever try to imagine you were in the depths of despair?" "No, I didn't." "Then I don't think you can understand what it's like," Anne said gently. "It's a very uncomfortable feeling indeed. When you try to eat, a lump comes right up in your throat, and you can't swallow anything, not even if it were a chocolate caramel." She paused, thinking. "I had a chocolate caramel once, 2 years ago, and it was simply delicious. I've often imagined since then that I had a great many of them, but I always wake up just when I'm about to eat them." Her voice softened, most apologetic. "I do hope you won't be offended because I can't eat. Everything is extremely nice, but still, I cannot eat." Matthew, who had said very little, looked at her kindly. "I guess she's tired," he said quietly. There was a small pause. Then he added, "Best to put her to bed, Marilla." Marilla hesitated. She had been wondering that very thing, where the child should be put. The little couch in the kitchen chamber that she had prepared for the boy that they had expected. But somehow, it didn't seem the right place for this child. There was a spare room, but that too felt out of question. So there remained only the East Gable room. Marilla rose, took up a candle, and turned toward Anne. "Come with me." Anne followed. She moved quietly now, carrying her carpet bag close, as though it held everything she had, which in truth it did. The hall was spotless. The stairs were narrow and clean, and the faint light of the candle made small, careful shadows along the walls. At the top, Marilla opened a door and led the way inside. The room was very plain. Whitewashed walls, bare and still, a narrow bed with high post, a small table, a simple chair, and a little mirror that reflected the candlelight, and a thin, wavering glow. Everything was neat, everything was exact, and everything felt very quiet. Marilla set the candle down. "I suppose you have a nightgown," she said. Anne nodded. "Yes, I have two. The matron of the asylum made them for me. They're fearfully skimpy, but one can dream just as well in them as in the lovely trailing ones, with frills about the neck. So that is one comfort." Marilla gave a short, practical nod. "Well, undress as quick as you can and go to bed. I'll come back in a few minutes for the candle. I don't trust you to put it out yourself." Anne looked at her very seriously. "I never put out a candle," she said. "I always imagined it some kind of beautiful glowing spirit, and it feels dreadful to snuff it out." Marilla did not answer that. She turned and left the room, closing the door behind her. For a moment, Anne stood very still. Then she moved quickly, almost hurriedly, as if the quiet pressed too closely around her. She changed into her nightgown and climbed into the narrow bed, drawing the covers up over her shoulders. The room felt large in its emptiness. The walls seemed to watch. The silence deepened. When Marilla returned, she paused just inside the door. Anne's clothes lay scattered where she had left them, and the bedclothes rose in a small, uneven shape. Marilla gathered the garments, folded them neatly, and placed them on the chair. Then she picked up the candle and went to the bedside. "Good night," she said, a little awkwardly, but not unkindly. For a moment, nothing moved. Then Anne's face appeared suddenly above the covers, eyes wide in the dim light. "How can you call it a good night," she said softly, "when you know it must be the very worst night I've ever had?" She looked at Marilla with such earnest sorrow that it might have been almost comical if it had not been so real. Then she slipped back beneath the covers again. Marilla stood for a moment. There was nothing more to say. She took the candle and left the room. Downstairs, the house was quiet again. Matthew sat in the kitchen, restless in a way that he couldn't quite name. Marilla moved more slowly now, her thoughts still unsettled. "Well, this is a pretty kettle of fish," she said at last. "One of us will have to drive over to Mrs. Spencer's tomorrow. This child will have to be sent back." Matthew didn't answer immediately. "Yes, I suppose so," he said at last. "You suppose so? You don't know it?" said Marilla. Matthew looked down at his hands. "Well now, she's a real nice little thing," he said. "It's kind of a pity to send her back when she's so set on staying." Marilla turned to him sharply. "Matthew Cuthbert, you don't mean to say you think we ought to keep her?" "Well, no, I suppose not exactly," he said. "We could hardly be expected to keep her. I should say not. What good would she be to us? Matthew lifted his head slightly. We might be some good to her, he said quietly. Marilla made a sound of impatience. Oh, she can talk fast enough, I saw that. It's nothing in her favor. I don't want an orphan girl, and if I did, she isn't the style I'd pick out. She set a dish down with a small, decisive motion. No, she must be sent back where she came from. Matthew said nothing more. After a while, he rose. Well now, I'm going to bed. To bed Matthew went, and later, when the dishes were cleared away, Marilla followed. Upstairs in the east gable, a lonely little figure lay awake in the darkness, very still, very quiet, until at last even her tears grew tired, and sleep came softly, at last. The house had gone quiet. Outside, the night had settled fully over Avonlea, spreading softly across the fields and the orchard beyond. The last faint traces of dusk had long since faded, leaving only the deep, gentle stillness that comes when everything has come to rest. The trees moved lightly in the dark, their leaves whispering now and then, as if exchanging quiet thoughts no one else could hear. Inside, the lamps had been put out. The kitchen was neat again, the table cleared, the dishes dried and set away. Everything was as it always was, and yet it didn't feel quite the same. Marilla lay awake for a time. Her hands were folded beneath the coverlet, her mind turning over the events of the evening, a message sent, the mistake made, and the child, now sleeping under her roof. She did not like disorder. She didn't like uncertainty. And yet both had arrived together. Below the house was still. Above, in the east gable, there was no sound at all. At last, even her thoughts slowed. The night held everything in quiet, and little by little, sleep came. Morning came gently. A pale, silvery light found its way through the windows at first, touching the walls and the floor in soft degrees, before brightening into a clearer gold of early day. Outside, the orchard stirred, a breeze passing lightly through the blossoming trees, carrying the faintest sweetness with them. The grass, still damp with dew, caught the light in tiny, shining points. Somewhere beyond the house, a bird began to sing, tentatively at first, and then with growing confidence, as if reminding the world that the morning had begun. In the kitchen, Marilla was already at work. The fire was lit, the kettle set, the small, familiar sounds of morning moving steadily forward. Everything followed its proper order, but beneath it, something remained unsettled. Matthew came in quietly. He took his place at the table without speaking, his movements slow, thoughtful. For a few moments, neither of them said anything. The ordinary rhythm of the morning held, but only just. At last, Marilla set down her work. Well, she said, this is a pretty kettle of fish. Matthew nodded slightly. Yes, he said. One of us will have to drive over to Mrs. Spencer's today, Marilla continued. This child will have to be sent back to the asylum. Matthew's gaze shifted toward the window. The morning light had grown brighter now, resting across the fields in quiet openness. Yes, I suppose so, he said. You only suppose, Marilla turned toward him. Matthew, it's plain enough what must be done. Matthew shifted a little in his chair. She's a real nice thing, he said after a moment. It seems hard to send her away after she's come all this distance. Marilla's expression tightened. That has nothing to do with it, she said. We've asked for a boy. A boy is what we need. Matthew looked down at his hands. She didn't come of her own choosing. She was sent. Marilla drew in a small breath. "That may be," she said, "but it doesn't alter the facts. We can't keep her simply because we feel sorry for her." Matthew didn't answer right away. "She's been looking for a place," he said after a moment. "You can see that plain enough." Marilla gave a short, restrained shake of the head. "There are proper places for children like that, and she must go back to one of them." Matthew's voice was softer now. "She's been taken to this place already. It doesn't seem right to send her off again so soon." Marilla turned back toward her work. "We are not in the position to take children in," she said, "especially not a girl. She would be no help to us." Matthew lifted his head slightly. "We might be of some help to her," he said. The words fell more quietly this time. Not argued, not pressed, simply offered. Marilla didn't turn. She must be sent back. There was less edge in it now, but no less certainty. Matthew sat still for a moment longer. Then he rose. "Well, I'll see to the horses." He moved toward the door, then paused, just briefly. But whatever he had been about to say, he let it go and stepped outside into the morning. The kitchen fell still again. Marilla stood for a moment, her hands resting lightly against the table. Then she drew a breath, set her shoulders, and returned to her work. Upstairs in the east gable, the morning light had reached the narrow bed. Anne lay very still, her eyes open, watching the pale brightness gather along the wall. For a moment, she didn't move. The world felt unfamiliar again, as though she had awakened somewhere between what had been imagined and what was real. Then the memory came, the journey, the house, the mistake, Green Gables, and the quiet, certain understanding that she did not belong there. A flicker of something bright moved through her, quick and instinctive. For just a moment, she let herself imagine that she was wanted, that she would stay, that this room, plain and still as it was, might become her own. That morning outside the window belonged to her too. The thought warmed her for a breath or two, soft and glowing. Then it faded. Reality turned gently, but it did return. Anne drew in a small breath. The feeling left behind was different now. Not the sharp despair of the night before, but something quieter. Kind of waiting, kind of listening, as though she stood on the edge of something she couldn't see clearly yet. She sat up slowly. The morning had come all the same, and whatever the day would bring, it had already begun. Morning had come fully to Green Gables. The light had deepened into a clear, gentle gold, resting softly along the walls and gathering in quiet pools across the floor. Outside, the world had awakened without haste. The orchard stirred in the early air, the branches lifting and settling again, their blossoms pale and luminous against the sky. A breeze passed lightly through them, carrying the faint, sweet scent of apple bloom and something green and newly growing. The house itself seemed to hold that quiet, as though it had risen into the day without disturbing the stillness of the night. Upstairs in the east gable, the light reached slowly across the narrow bed. Anne lay awake, watching it. She had been awake for some time. Sleep had come at last in the night, but it had not held her long. Now she lay very still, her eyes following the way the light moved along the whitewashed wall. For a moment, she didn't think of anything at all. It was only a morning, only a room, only light. Then little by little, the memory returned. The long journey, the kind, quiet man who had brought her here, the house, the mistake, and the understanding quite but certain that she didn't belong. The thought came gently this time, not as it had the night before, sharp and overwhelming. It settled instead like something she had already begun to accept. Anne drew a small breath. Then she turned her head toward the window. The small curtain stirred slightly in the breeze. She slipped out of bed and crossed the floor softly, her bare feet making no sound. When she reached the window, she paused, as though something beyond it had already called to her. Then she pushed it open. The morning air came in, cool and fresh, touching her face like something alive. She leaned forward slightly, resting her hands on the sill. And then she saw it. The great cherry tree stood close beside the house, its branches lifting outward and upward, heavy with white blossoms. They moved gently in the breeze, touching the side of the house now and then with the softest sound. Beyond it, the orchard stretched wide, rows of apple trees and cherry trees all in bloom. The ground beneath them was scattered with light, and the grass shone faintly with dew. Farther down, the land dipped into a hollow, where the narrow brook ran, its path winding in and out of sight. She could hear it, a soft, irregular sound, like quiet laughter carried through the morning. Beyond the brook, white birches rose lightly, their slender trunks pale against the darker green. And beyond them still, the land lifted again, soft hills touched with fir and spruce, and in the far distance, the faintest shimmer of blue water. Anne didn't move. Her eyes traveled slowly over everything, as though each detail must be gathered carefully and held. It was more beautiful than anything she had ever known. She stayed there, very still, for a long time, looking, listening, breathing. For a moment, just a moment, she forgot everything else. Forgot the mistake, forgot the uncertainty, forgot the quiet fear that waited just beneath her thoughts. There was only the morning, and the feeling that something in the world was very right. A small, quiet happiness touched her. Then softly, a hand rested on her shoulder. Anne started, just slightly. Marilla stood behind her. "It's time to get dressed," she said. Her voice was brisk, but there was less sharpness in it than before, as though the morning itself had softened. Anne turned toward her, her face still bright with what she had seen. "Oh, isn't it wonderful?" she said softly. Marilla glanced toward the window. "It's a big tree," she said. "It blooms well enough, though the fruit isn't much to speak of." Anne shook her head gently. "Oh, I don't mean only the tree," she said. "I mean everything. The orchard, the brook, the woods, the whole world." She turned back again, as though she couldn't help it. "I can hear the brook," she said quietly. "It sounds as though it's laughing. Have you ever noticed how cheerful brooks are? Even when they're frozen, I always imagine they're still there underneath, waiting." Marilla didn't answer. Anne's voice softened. "I'm very glad there is a brook here," she went on. "Even if I don't stay, I shall like to remember that there was one." The words lingered a moment. Then she drew in a breath. "I'm not unhappy this morning," she said. "I never can be in the morning. Mornings feel hopeful." A small pause followed. "But I do feel a little sad," she added quietly. "I was imagining that perhaps I might stay, just for a while longer." It was a comforting thought. She folded her hands together. "But imagining things is like that," she said softly. "It feels so real, and then, when it ends, it leaves a quiet sort of ache behind." She stood there for a moment longer, looking out. Then slowly she turned back towards the room. "But still, she said gently. It's a lovely morning. The light rested softly around her, and the quiet of the day held, as though nothing yet had been decided. The morning settled fully into the house. Sunlight moved quietly across the kitchen floor, touching the table, the chairs, and the small, ordinary things that belonged to the day. Marilla stood near the window, composed and practical as ever, though something in her manner held a faint edge of unease, as though the rhythm of the house had shifted, just slightly, from what she knew it to be. "You better get dressed and come downstairs," she said. "And never mind your imaginings. Breakfast is waiting. Wash your face and comb your hair. Leave the window up and turn your bedclothes back neatly. Be as smart as you can." Anne listened with careful attention, as though each instruction were something to be gathered and held. And she was, indeed, very quick. Within a short while she came downstairs again, her clothes neat, her hair brushed and braided, her face fresh from washing. There was a small, quiet satisfaction about her, the feeling of having done exactly what had been asked. Though, in haste, she had forgotten one small thing. "I'm pretty hungry this morning," she said as she slipped into her chair Marilla placed for her. Her voice was light again, not quite as it had been before, but gently returning. "The world doesn't seem such a howling wilderness as it did last night," she went on. "I'm so glad it's a sunny morning. Though I like rainy mornings very much, too. All sorts of mornings are interesting, don't you think? You never quite know what might happen in them." Marilla gave a short, firm glance in her direction. "For pity's sake, hold your tongue," she said. "You talk entirely too much for a little girl." The words fell plainly, without softness, but not with cruelty. Anne drew in a small breath, then very obediently she held her tongue. So thoroughly, in fact, that the silence which followed seemed almost as noticeable as her speaking had been. The meal went on in quiet. Outside, the morning continued, light shifting, leaves stirring, the distant sound of the brook threading faintly through the air. Anne sat still, her hands resting lightly, her gaze drifting now and then toward the window. It was as though part of her had already gone outside, drawn into something wide and green and full of possibility. Marilla noticed. A slight uneasiness moved through her. There was something unfamiliar in the child, something too airy, too distant, as though her thoughts belonged elsewhere entirely. And yet, Matthew wished to keep her. The thought lingered. Marilla didn't like it. Matthew's ways were quiet, but firm once set, and she knew well enough that when he took a notion, he held it with a persistence that needed no words. The idea settled her more than she cared to admit. When the meal ended, Anne stirred slightly, as though returning from somewhere far away. "I could wash the dishes if you like," she offered. Marilla looked at her with a measured expression. "Can you wash dishes properly?" she asked. "Pretty well," Anne said. "I'm better at looking after children, though. I've had so much experience at that. It's such a pity you haven't got any here for me to care for." "I don't feel as if I want any more children to look after than I've got," said Marilla shortly. Anne considered this for a moment. "I think Mr. Matthew is very kind," she said gently. "He didn't mind how much I talked. He seemed to like it. I felt as though he understood me. Just a little." "You're both queer enough, if that's what you mean," said Marilla. Then after a pause, "Yes, you may wash the dishes. Take plenty of hot water and be sure you dry them properly." Anne rose at once, moving with quiet eagerness. She washed the dishes carefully, not perfectly, but with enough attention to satisfy. Afterward, she attempted to make her bed. This proved more difficult. The blankets resisted her efforts. The mattress shifted under her hands, and the whole task seemed to require a kind of knowledge she did not yet possess. Still, she tried, and when it was done, however imperfectly, it was done with sincerity. At last, Marilla spoke again. "You may go outside for a while," she said. "Amuse yourself for a bit." The words had scarcely left her mouth before Anne turned toward the door. Her face brightened at once, light returning, quick and alive. She moved eagerly, almost as though she might run. But just at the threshold, she stopped. The brightness faded. She turned back slowly, came to the table again, and sat down. "What is the matter now?" Marilla asked. Anne folded her hands. "I don't dare go outside," she said quietly. "Why not?" She hesitated, then answered with a soft, almost careful honesty. "If I can't stay here, there isn't much use in my loving Green Gables." Her voice was very gentle. "And I do love it. Already." The room had grown very still again. Outside the morning continued, light moving through the orchard, branches stirring softly in the breeze, the distant murmur of the brook threading through it all. Anne sat at the table, her hands folded before her, as though holding herself carefully in place. "If I go out there," she said slowly, "and get acquainted with all those trees and flowers and the orchard and the brook, I won't be able to help loving them." Her voice was gentle, but there was something steady beneath it now. "And it's hard enough already," she went on, "so I won't make it any harder." She glanced toward the window. "I want to go out so much," she admitted softly. "It feels as though everything is calling to me. Anne, Anne, come out to us." A faint pause. "But it's better not." The words settled quietly between them. "There's no use in loving things if you have to be torn from them," she said. "And it's so hard not to love things, isn't it?" Marilla didn't answer. Anne's gaze drifted again. "I was so glad when I thought I was going to live here. I thought I'd have so many things to love, and nothing to hinder me." A small breath. "But that was only for a little while, and now it's over." She straightened slightly, as though gathering herself. "I am resigned now," she added, with a kind of careful dignity. "So I don't think I'll go out, for fear I'll get unresigned again." Then after a moment, her tone shifted, lighter, almost curious. "What is the name of that geranium on the windowsill, please?" "That's the apple-scented geranium," said Marilla. "Oh, I don't mean that sort of name," Anne said quickly. "I mean a name you gave it yourself." Marilla looked at her. "I never gave it any name." Anne brightened at once. "Oh, may I give it one then?" she asked. "May I call it, let me see, Bonnie? That would do very nicely. May I call it Bonnie while I'm here?" "Goodness, I don't care," said Marilla. "But what is the sense of naming a geranium?" Anne smiled faintly. "I like things to have names. It makes them seem more like people. And how we know it doesn't hurt a geranium's feelings to be called nothing but a geranium." Marilla made a small sound under her breath. "I shall call it Bonnie," Anne continued peacefully. "I named the cherry tree outside my window this morning. I call it Snow Queen, because it's so white." Her eyes lifted as though she could still see it. "Of course, it won't always be in blossom," she added, "but one can imagine that it is, can't one?" Marilla turned away, shaking her head slightly. "I never in all my life heard anything like it," she muttered. Marilla went down to the cellar for potatoes, but even as she moved about her work, her thoughts lingered. "She is kind of interesting," she admitted reluctantly to herself. "And I'm wondering already what she'll say next." Upstairs, Anne had slipped into a quiet reverie again, her chin resting lightly in her hands, her gaze toward the sky. Time passed unnoticed. At last, the early dinner was set upon the table. "I suppose I can have a mare and a buggy this afternoon, Matthew," said Marilla. Matthew nodded. He looked toward Anne, just for a moment, something quiet and thoughtful in his expression. Marilla saw it. "I'm going to drive over to White Sands and settle this matter," she said firmly. "I'll take Anne with me. Mrs. Spencer will likely make arrangements to send her back at once." Matthew said nothing. The silence stretched. Marilla drew a small breath, as though she had spent more words than necessary. There was something particularly aggravating, she thought, about a man who would not argue. In due time, Matthew harnessed the sorrel. The buggy was brought round. Marilla and Anne climbed in, and they set off down the lane. Matthew opened the gate for them, and as they passed through, he said, almost absently, "Little Jerry Butte was here this morning. I told him I thought I might hire him for the summer." Marilla made no reply. She flicked the rein sharply. The mare sprang forward, startled by the suddenness, and the buggy rattled quickly down the road. For a moment, Marilla looked back. Matthew stood at the gate, leaning slightly over it, watching them go. There was something in the way he looked after them, quiet and a little wistful, that lingered longer than the sound of the wheels. The buggy rolled steadily along the road. The morning had opened wide and clear, the light resting softly over the fields. The air fresh with early summer, and the distant line of water glimmering now and then through the trees. Anne sat beside Marilla, very upright at first, as though she had resolved to behave exactly as she ought. But the world would not be ignored. "Do you know," she said at last, leaning forward slightly, "I've made up my mind to enjoy this drive." Her voice carried a quiet determination. "It's been my experience that you can nearly always enjoy things if you make up your mind firmly that you will. Of course, you must make it up firmly." She folded her hands together again, quite seriously. "I am not going to think about going back while we're having this drive," she added. "I'm just going to think about the drive." A moment later, her attention slipped gentle away from that resolution. "Oh, look," she said softly, turning her head. "There's a little wild rose. Isn't it lovely?" Her voice warmed again, almost without her noticing. "Don't you think it must be glad to be a rose?" she went on. "And wouldn't it be nice if roses could talk? I'm sure they would say such lovely things." The buggy wheels moved on, steady and rhythmic. "And isn't pink the most enchanting color?" she continued dreamily. "I love it, but I can't wear it." She sighed, a small, thoughtful sound. "Red-haired people can't wear pink, not even in imagination. Do you suppose," she added, glancing at Marilla, "that anybody's hair was ever red when they were young and then changed to something else when they grew up?" "No," said Marilla, "and I don't suppose it will ever in your case either." Anne gave a gentle sigh. "Well, that's another hope gone," she said quietly. "My life is a perfect graveyard of buried hopes." She paused, then added with a faint, almost apologetic brightness, "That's something I read in a book once. I say it over to comfort myself when I'm disappointed." "I don't see where the comfort comes in," said Marilla. "Oh, because it sounds so nice and romantic," Anne explained, "as if I were a heroine in a book." She turned her gaze outward again. "A graveyard full of buried hopes is rather beautiful, don't you think?" she said. "I'm rather glad I have one." The road curved gently. "Are we going to the Lake of Shining Waters today?" "We're not going over Barry's Pond," said Marilla. "We're going to the shore road." "Shore road," Anne repeated softly. She let the words linger, as though tasting them. "That sounds lovely," she said. "Is it as lovely as it sounds? When you said it, I could see it in my mind all at once." She smiled faintly. "And White Sands is a pretty name, too, though I don't quite like it as well as Avonlea. Avonlea sounds like music." The breeze lifted slightly, brushing past them. "How far is it?" 5 miles, said Marilla. "And since you're so determined to talk, you might as well tell me something about yourself." Anne straightened a little. Oh, what I know about myself isn't very interesting, she said quickly. But if you'd let me tell you what I imagine about myself, that would be much more worthwhile. No, Marilla said firmly. I don't want any imaginings. Stick to the facts. Begin at the beginning. Anne hesitated. Then she gave a small, resigned breath. I was 11 last March, and I was born in Bolingbroke, Nova Scotia. Her tone had changed. Quieter now, more careful. My father's name was Walter Shirley, and he was a teacher. My mother's name was Bertha Shirley. She paused, then added softly, Aren't Walter and Bertha nice names? I suppose it doesn't matter what a person's name is, said Marilla, as long as he behaves himself. Anne considered this. I don't know, she said thoughtfully. I've never quite believed that. She watched the road ahead for a moment. I don't think a rose would be as nice if it were called something else. It would still be a rose, but it wouldn't feel the same. The buggy rolled on. My father and mother were teachers, she continued. They lived in a very little house. I've never seen it, but I've imagined it so often that I know exactly how it must have looked. Her voice softened further. There were honeysuckles by the window, and lilacs in the yard, and muslin curtains. She smiled faintly. Muslin curtains make a house feel kind. The fields passed slowly on either side. They were very poor, she added, but I think they must have been happy. A quiet moment followed. Then Anne drew a small breath. That's what I imagine anyway. And for a little while after that, she didn't speak. The road stretched gently ahead of them, pale beneath the afternoon light. For a little while, the buggy moved on in quiet. The sound of the wheels softened against the earth, and the breeze carried the faint scent of grass and distant water. Anne sat very still now. Her earlier brightness had settled into something quieter. Not gone, but softened. Do you like poetry? She asked at last, her voice gentle again. The kind that gives you the sort of crinkly feeling along your back? She didn't wait for an answer, but went on more thoughtfully than before. There's a piece in the 5th Reader, The Downfall of Poland, that's full of thrills. I wasn't in the 5th Reader, of course, only the 4th, but the big girls used to lend it to me. Marilla glanced at her. Were the women you lived with, Mrs. Thomas and Mrs. Hammond, good to you? She asked. Anne hesitated. The color rose slowly in her face. Oh, they meant to be, she said. Her voice was careful now, as though she were choosing each word. I'm sure they meant to be as kind as they could. And when people mean to be good to you, you don't mind so much when they aren't always. She looked down at her hands. They had a great deal to trouble them, she added quietly. It's very trying to have a drunken husband and twins 3 times in succession. The buggy rolled on. But I feel sure that they meant to be good to me. Marilla said nothing. Then after a moment, Anne too fell silent. The shore road opened slowly before them, curving between the trees and glimpses of water that flashed now and then through the branches. Marilla guided the mare almost absently. Her thoughts had turned inward. There was something in the child's voice, not complaint, not bitterness, but a quiet acceptance that settled more deeply than ever. A life of small labors, of being passed from one place to another, of learning very early not to expect too much. Marilla's mouth tightened slightly. It was a lonely sort of childhood, and yet the child beside her had not grown small from it. She'd grown bright. Anne lifted her head again after a time. I lived with Mrs. Hammond for over 2 years, she said, as though continuing a story she had only set down briefly. And then Mr. Hammond died, and she went away, and I had to go to the asylum. Her tone remained steady, but softer now. They didn't want me there very much, she added. They said it was overcrowded, but they had to keep me until Mrs. Spencer came. The breeze moved lightly across the road. Anne drew in a small breath. I didn't like talking about it very much, she said almost to herself. Marilla gave a short nod. Did you ever go to school? She asked. A little, said Anne. Her voice lifted just slightly. I went some when I stayed with Mrs. Thomas, but it was too far in winter, and there was a vacation in summer, so I could only go in spring and fall. But I went while I was also at the asylum, she added, and I learned to read quite well. A faint brightness returned. I know a great many pieces of poetry by heart. The buggy wheels turned steadily. My mother died when I was very small, she said after a moment, and my father died soon after. There was no drama in the words now, only quiet truth. I never remember calling anyone mother, she went on. I think it must be very nice. The road grew still again. Anne's voice softened further. Nobody ever really wanted me, she said, not sadly, but as though stating something long understood. But I always imagined things would be different someday. She lifted her eyes to the trees as they passed. I imagined a place where I might belong. The buggy moved forward beneath the branches, light shifting gently across the road. For a little while, neither of them spoke. And this time, the silence wasn't empty. It simply rested there, quiet and full. The road changed as they went. It grew narrower, more winding, drawn close between the dark firs on one side and the open sweep of the sea on the other. The air itself seemed different here, salted, brighter. The sound of waves rose and fell between them, steady and unhurried, like a breath that had been moving long before they arrived and would continue long after. Marilla held the reins firmly, her gaze set ahead. She has too much to say, she thought, though not unkindly now. But there was no sharpness in the thought, only consideration. Nothing coarse in the child's speech, nothing careless, and beneath it all, something gentle, something teachable. The buggy rolled on. To their right, the fir trees stood close and thick, their dark branches unmoved by the wind. To their left, the land fell away into the red sandstone cliffs, steep and sun-warmed, leading down to the narrow strips of shore where the water slipped in and out among smooth stones. Beyond it all, the sea stretched wide and blue. Gulls wheeled overhead, their wings catching the light as they turned. For a long while, Anne said nothing. She simply looked. Then softly, "Isn't the sea wonderful?" Her voice carried no rush now, only quiet wonder. "I saw the sea once before," she went on, "when I lived in Marysville. We went for a day, and I remembered it for years afterward." She watched the water as they moved beside it. "But this is lovelier," she said. "Don't you think it must be a happy thing to be a gull?" She smiled faintly to herself. "To wake at sunrise and fly over the water all day and come home again at night." The breeze lifted a strand of her hair. "I think I would like that," she said. The buggy continued along the shore road. Ahead, a large house came slowly into view, set back from the road and standing alone against the open sky. "What is this place?" Anne asked. "That's the White Sands Hotel," said Marilla. "It's not in use just yet. People come there for the summer." Anne looked at it thoughtfully. "I'm glad it isn't where we're going," she said. There was a small pause. "I was afraid it might be," she added more quietly. "I don't want to arrive there." Her voice lowered further. "It feels as though, when we do, everything will end." The wheels turned. The sea moved. The wind passed lightly over the road. For a little while, neither of them spoke again. The house faded behind them. The shoreline curved onward. Then the road, still unwinding ahead, carried them gently forward towards something not yet known. And now, the road goes quiet once more. The sound of the buggy wheels has faded into the distance, and the shore lies still beneath the wide, open sky. The sea moves in its steady rhythm. The wind drifts softly through the trees, and the light of day settles gently across the land. Behind them, the house they have left behind. Ahead, the place they have not yet reached. Nothing has been decided. Nothing has been settled. And yet, something has begun. A small turning, a quiet shifting, a thought not yet spoken aloud, a feeling not yet fully understood. The child who arrived so suddenly has not yet found her place, but neither has she been forgotten. And somewhere within the stillness of Green Gables, something is beginning to take root. It's not certain, and it isn't named, but it is there, and it will grow. When you return, we'll follow the road a little farther and see where it leads. For now, let the sea grow distant again. Let the wind soften. Let the light fade gently from the sky, and allow the story to rest here for tonight. You are safe, and you are loved. You've been listening to Nikki Woo Cozy Stories, created by Nicole T. Woodard. May your dreams be gentle, and your sleep be deep.